such an impressive venue to be in, and I think the words that Anna said gave me some shivers in terms of, we sit at the heart of human creation, and humans will continue to create and be the center of work as we go forward. But today, and this morning's panel is all about adoption of these technologies from the perspectives of those on the panel with me here today. We know that the best results from AI come from augmenting it, not replacing work. So how practically can we center people in society in the design, development, and deployment of these incredible new technologies? That's the question at the heart of what we should all be asking ourselves. How do we optimize the social and technological capabilities of these systems so that working lives are transformed for good rather than replaced? I am going to ask every one of our panel members to kind of set out their stall, introduce themselves, because they'll do a much better job than I would with all their illustrious careers here on stage. And then I'll ask them some questions, one at a time, to kind of get their perspectives and dive a little deeper into how they're coming at this and some of the kind of help that they can give as we go through these transitions. But that doesn't leave you off the hook. Please do go on to Slido and start adding your questions, because we will be coming to you as well. So please start doing that straight away. But with that, I'm going to hand over and ask for you to please introduce yourself and speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. Otherwise, we won't get to the audience and they need to stay on the hook and awake.
I need someone with a time card. Thank you so much. Great introduction. So happy to be here today, and thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm Erin Young. I'm head of innovation and technology policy at the Institute of Directors. If you haven't heard of us, we are the oldest business group in the UK. We have about 20,000 members who are board members, directors, senior business leaders. We work to promote kind of good governance and high levels of skill and integrity among directors for the public good. And my role focuses on ensuring that mainstream British business have a voice in the policy debates across the spectrum of science, innovation, and technology. So this is the angle that I'm coming from today. So I was asked to speak briefly about one blocker that needs dealing with in order that we can adopt technologies in ways that transform working lives for good. I think first and foremost, we need to address the readiness of organizations to adopt and govern these new AI technologies responsibly. So at the moment, the UK government, as I'm sure many of you know, is rightly prioritising adoption, for example, through the AI Opportunities Action Plan. But across IOD membership, we're seeing a great deal of uncertainty among directors as to what responsible adoption actually looks like in practice. In a recent survey, we found that over a third of directors are unsure which skills are or may be needed in their sector. And skills and training gaps consistently come up as one of the major blockers to AI adoption. This is particularly important if adoption is going to be genuinely workflow-led and for the good of the workforce. But I think importantly, this issue goes beyond workforce skills. We also found that more than half of directors identified a limited understanding of AI models and tools, technology systems for themselves. So these skills gaps really kind of, they maintain across directors as well. This is really important because boards are ultimately responsible for risk governance and long-term value creation, including when it comes to AI adoption. But many directors feel that they're being asked to kind of set the direction for AI adoption, approve AI strategies, but they don't really have an idea of what good practice, responsible practice looks like, what clear guardrails are, where accountability sits. The government, again, is rightly beginning to recognise this challenge, so initiatives like the AI Skills Boost, for which the IOD are a strategic partner, is important, and these are important first steps. But it's early days, and if leaders lack the kind of confidence or understanding, it will be very, very difficult to adopt these technologies in ways that genuinely improve working lives. At the same time, many business leaders feel that even kind of large-scale workforce upskilling is premature until taking a step further back, until even the kind of business value of these technologies is proven. There's still significant uncertainty around reliability, cybersecurity, data governance, ethics, workforce impacts, you name it, there's uncertainty around it. And businesses, when I speak to boards, they feel caught between these two competing messages, which is AI adoption is essential for growth and competitiveness, you must adopt now. But on the other hand, you're basically responsible if everything goes wrong. And so there's understandable caution. And this particularly affects SMEs and smaller companies, which are the backbone of our economy. Larger firms can tend to absorb some of this risk a lot more than smaller companies. To be clear, mainstream business isn't asking for heavy-handed regulation, but they do need greater guidance around governance and adoption in general. And so we think about these kind of softer governance mechanisms like codes of conduct, assurance frameworks, standards, and so on for managing risk. So to kind of summarize the core blocker, or one of the core blockers, I would say that we can't expect to have people-centered AI adoption across the workforce without building the confidence, the capabilities, and the trust of the workforce, but particularly of leadership.
Thank you very much, Erin. I think this kind of really lovely backs up the Pissarides review that we just heard about Kester speak about as well. May I come to you next, please, Kate?
Lovely, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name's Kate Field. I work for the British Standards Institution, BSI. My role is Head of Human and Social Sustainability, which I think sounds like a very apt title when we're looking at technology and the impacts that it has on humans in the workplace and wider society. I've worked at BSI now for 8.5 years. My background is actually from way back as a regulator in the field of health and safety, but I've worked in policy and commercially around the world. So it's really interesting for me to see how the debate and dialogue around AI and new forms of technology kind of cascades out in different parts of the world. And it's really fascinating because we've been doing a number of reports looking and tracking across from a global scale how businesses are kind of thinking about AI, and it's almost too much to keep up with. So our first report, I think, was about 3 years ago, and that first report was, yeah, we're aware of it, we're not sure what to do about it. The second report was, we ought to do something. And then the next report was, we're doing something. And then our last report last year was actually used AI to scan a number of annual reports from businesses around the world to see how much AI was being talked about in those annual reports against how much they were talking about upskilling and bringing on their human workforce. And interestingly enough, it was all about AI and not about the humans. And I think that brings us to one of the biggest challenges that we have. AI, like any technology, like any tool, has its upsides and it has its downsides. And there are some really great upsides, and there are some challenges we need to think about from the human side. And it's really interesting to kind of hear that there's concerns around what governance, what guardrails, what standards need to be in place. And interestingly, they are there. So one of the things the British Standards do is bring together the experts to provide those guardrails. But what's really interesting is the core standard around AI is out, has been out for just over a year now, but businesses don't feel ready to adopt it because they haven't answered all of these other questions. So when we're thinking about humans in particular and what it means for those who are in the workplace, there are kind of the 3 C's. There's consultation. The best way of bringing into use in an effective way any new technology, and particularly something like AI, where there's a lot of myths and misconceptions, is to talk to your people. Not rocket science, not something weird and strange. Consultation, talk to them about how you're looking to use it, get their input, what would make a difference for them, what are their concerns. If you address and involve them before you start doing it and along the process, it makes life a lot easier for the business and, of course, most importantly, for the people. So that consultation. Then there's collaboration, and I think this is one of the things that I'm seeing more and more that is critical to the success of these technologies for some of our other challenges we have around health and safety, psychological, mental health, though all of these sorts of things, is collaboration between the different functions. So quite often AI is maybe sat with the IT team, who aren't talking to the HR or the health and safety team about what this means for people. So you're immediately going to create barriers and gaps. And the last one is capability, is what does that skill development look like? And I think one of the myths that I'd really like us to be super conscious of during today is there is an assumption that older workers can't adapt to the technology and younger workers are all over it. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. And I think as long as we keep that misconception alive, we are doing a disservice to all of our people. Young people are really concerned about what AI is and what it's going to mean for their working lives. They're not comfortable actually using it. They don't know kind of some of the parameters. And some of our older workers are really enthusiastic about understanding what this is. So bear that in mind, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Anna, I'm coming to you next, please.
Thank you. I'm going to build on the opening words to say a little bit about work design and job design and why that might be helpful to begin to think about and answer our first challenge, our adoption challenge. So we know anyway that good job design is associated with augmentation, with creativity, with innovation and productivity, and also good work quality. So that's a more established literature. Work design, or as we're introducing the concept of good work design, invites us to go a bit further and think about what factors do we know in the organisation or more widely that are relevant to making that decision. And if we think about technology adoption, we can see, and we have seen, that tasks and skills and technology and responsibilities and roles and decision rights are all changing together. And so we need simple models, sort of heuristics, and more than that, to cut through this and understand it, but also understand it at pace. So one of the things that we found in our case studies, and we've already referred to, are that it's like a kind of elephant in the room, that there is a wild west, but there's also a great sense of urgency and pace that it must be done at fast when people don't understand that. So work design gives us a model through which we can understand and then begin to actively reshape sort of better futures at a tool level, a team level, an organisational level, or wider. And that's why we have used this model. The particular framework that we used, which comes from a doctorate, came about because it drew together the frameworks and thinking about responsible innovation and good governance, thinking about those steps and taking participants through the organisation in order to implement what you've said about participation and collaboration through a structured process that made that easier.
Thank you very much, Anna. I have to say, just on a personal level, I love hearing all of you back up the things I say all the time with actual evidence. So that makes me feel really, really good about myself. So thank you. John, I'm going to come to you. You've got your own mic, okay? Could you please tell us about where you're coming from and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the blocker that you see?
Surely. My name is John Amaechi. I'm a professor of leadership at the University of Exeter Business School and part of their leadership centre, the Centre for Leadership there. I'm interested in human thriving. I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. I see some challenges here that are people-centered and also presumption-centered. So when we look at the work that we're doing with our clients, I have a small consultancy, APS Intelligence, and when we look at the work we're doing, there's presumptions that start from the very beginning. the idea that young people, it's already been mentioned, are keen on this technology. Many of you will have seen the now viral video of the Orlando commencement speech. My son went to that university. It is a hard crowd at the best of times, but they booed a commencement speaker continually, talking about how brilliant AI was and the wonderful impact it would have on their working lives. So it's unusual for us to have a technology where we normally would presume that young people would be engaged with and skilled on. And that's the second presumption. Is the problem really skill? I think in the early days of AI, it was this conversation about, do you know how to create a prompt? And I don't think that skill is just the problem anymore. I think there are a number of presumptions that are problematic. I think the idea that skill is the problem is one of them, when actually it could be more about the AI orientation that people have. Some people have what we call an antagonistic orientation. That was evidenced in that crowd in Orlando. Other people are more apathetic. There's not a huge number that we found who are in that proper adoptive stage, and we see this because of the prevalence of shadow AI use, which is not normative in organizations and is risk-laden. So that's one of the presumptions that we think is problematic. The second one is that organizations seem to have a presumption of specific utility for AI, the idea that they assume that it's going to be good, and they implement it on that assumption, when that assumption might be based on the urging of a particularly persuasive Gemini salesperson, or it might be based on a particularly robust board-level conversation where the conversation is less about how this will be used and whether it's going to be people-centered, and more about we must do it because our nearest competitor's just done it and has on their website that everything is AI-powered. And so I think there is an abdication from the very beginning, and the process that we would take with organizations to say, have you done that audit about why you are using these specific tools? And then you watch these tools proliferate, and we talk about AI as if it's one thing, when the fact that you might be using Grammarly across your organization and have 10,000 seats on Gemini doesn't speak to adoption. It simply speaks to saturation and your subscription level. So there's all kinds of interesting things there that I think we want to explore as barriers. And I also think it's important to point out that we don't recognize the impact that technology has on people's identity. We would entirely agree with the idea that it's ridiculous to suggest that all old people, as an old person, can't grasp this technology and that all young people are all over it. But one of the things that you can see when you look at the ire of young people is the fact that it has fundamentally changed their identity when it comes to work. Some of the expectations they might have had about the kind of work that could have been their apprenticeship into greater, more meaningful things is now fundamentally changed forever. They're already witnessing how the pyramid, I'll not say scheme, but the pyramid of work in, for example, professional services, where the proving ground for a huge number of, 25,000 graduates every year in London alone, is all of a sudden cut out by offshoring and now AI and other technologies. And so people are responding to the adoption of AI not from a rational place, because human beings are not broadly. And certainly during transformation, we are less reasoned and less rational. So I think these are some of the barriers that exist outside of the training. And even when we look at training, the kind of training required to deal with these problems is not simply, here's how to build a prompt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think someone was clapping. I think that deserved a clap. Thank you. So it is wonderful to hear, and from the different perspectives on the panel, right? And we've heard here kind of the definition of AI, the fact that AI isn't one thing. We've talked about this elusive AI skill that everyone is looking for. I don't know. I've not been able to answer when someone says, "Where can I get the skill?" Like, where is it? And I think that is, part of this problem, is that we've actually de-skilled people by saying, the problem is it's your problem. You don't have the skill to adopt these technologies. And the last one is this understanding of how to actually meet challenges. How do you use these technologies to meet your challenges, rather than, oh, we have to, because we've been told by the government and everyone else that, and all our competitors are doing it, and these salespeople seem to think it's going to be really good, and so let's go and get a bunch of Gemini or ChatGPT licenses. What is the actual problem we're trying to solve, right? How do we solve that problem by using our experts, right, which remain as the people in our company? So I'm going to come now to each of you with a set of questions to kind of dig a little bit into your opening remarks, and then we'll come to you. So start thinking about your questions, please. Erin, I'm going to come to you first. From your work across the IOD and the Turing Institute, kind of a three-part question for you. The first one is about the gap between the AI ambition we have here in the UK and what we're practically seeing. The second is, what role specifically do you think that directors play in helping close that gap? And the third part of it is, are there any tools? And do you think that the policy tools that we currently have are helping directors with what they need?
Thank you. I mean, we've all of us touched upon this. One of the biggest gaps I see is between the scale of the UK's current AI ambitions, and then really the operational realities that most businesses are facing on the ground. Again, particularly, like I said earlier, particularly for SMEs and outside the tech sector, which again is the majority of our economy. So if we look at the AI Opportunities Action Plan, the investment allocated so far tends to skew towards infrastructure and, I guess you call it, ecosystem building, like AI growth zones, which, of course, this is important to get these foundations of our UK AI ecosystem. But what I'm seeing is many mainstream businesses are asking whether these are really the interventions that will, again, help them adopt AI practically and in responsible ways. Again, it's not addressing this elusive issue of what are we upskilling for? How are we reskilling? What are we doing here? And so there's really this sense across our membership and across business that this national AI conversation that we're having, often in pretty privileged rooms where people are working in tech or in policy, is really disconnected from the realities that businesses are facing on the ground. And I do really think a huge part of it is what's been mentioned already, is how we conceptualize AI. Like, obviously, it's not one thing. It's a huge ecosystem of tools and systems, and it's moving very rapidly, and it looks very different across sectors for the workforce versus for citizens. And I think this can lead a lot of organizations to start with, and what we keep seeing is, what can AI do for us? Again, it's this thing of we have to adopt AI. There's pressure from the government. There's pressure from big tech. Or what if our competitors solve it first? We're going to get left behind. Our business model is going to be irrelevant. Rather than asking, well, what are we actually trying to solve? What's our problem? Is AI the tool? Maybe not. Often not. I think kind of in the same vein, we're seeing these tensions between different policy areas more generally. So I'm noticing these, I guess you call them misalignments between tech policy on one hand, again underpinned by the action plan, and energy policy, labour market policy, for example. Lots of firms are operating under significant cost pressures and economic uncertainty, wider geopolitical uncertainty, and it's kind of coming up against our tech policies that are being formed. So in one survey, which was quite concerning, particularly what we're talking about today, we found that over half of directors said that they would now be more likely to explore automation, so not augmentation, automation, rather than hiring additional staff because of things like rising employment costs, additional pressures on business. So this is kind of going exactly against what we want to be doing when we're thinking about creating an inclusive AI economy. again, this kind of immediate conversation is then not necessarily how do we adopt AI, but it's how do we stay afloat? How do we remain commercially viable? So it's not just panicking that we're not adopting AI. It's, well, this is not even we can't even think about this yet. I think there is this real tension between the ambition in particular for the UK to, I think it's become the fastest AI adopter in the G7. And again, what I've been discussing, this much slower, more cautious pace of adoption for many reasons that we've spoken about, that we're seeing across business. So I think, lots of different approaches. We need this multifaceted approach to beginning to close this gap. But I think, firstly, this more joined up policy environment where we are thinking about tech-enabled growth from the same angle when we're in energy policy, we're in labour market policy, and so on. I think for businesses to know more about the governance structures that exist and to feel confident about how to employ these, and particularly not in a way that it's not creating these additional burdens on companies. We're seeing some good work around this in cyber resilience so far this year. From the government, and then adoption support that, again, works for mainstream businesses. I'm quite excited to see what, for example, the AI Adoption Business Summit might look like. We have Made Smarter, Bridge AI Economics Institute, and so on. But yeah, I think kind of in conclusion, we have to stop talking about AI in the abstract and spending more time, as thankfully we are on this panel, speaking about things like governance and organizational readiness and ultimately people.
Thank you very much, Erin. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? It's a year now since the AI Opportunities Action Plan, and one of them was for the UK to be better customers of AI, right? And that sits at the heart of this adoption question. But I think it's also important because you can hear from my accent, I'm actually Canadian, and I find that the UK doesn't take as much credit for the things they get right as you should. The rest of the world isn't doing this either, right? So it's not like the rest of traditional enterprise across the world is like well off on their AI journey and has left the UK behind. We are asking ourselves and thinking about all of the questions that sit as blockers, and you've heard that across this panel. The rest of the world is in exactly the same place, right? And it's hard to do this, which is why we are all still going through it together, right? And all of the ingredients are needed. We can't concentrate on one side and not the other. John, I'm going to come to you for one of the other ingredients, which is culture. I think, and you touched on this already about how we need to kind of get the culture right in order to embed these technologies into an organization. So can I ask you about culture first, and also about what does leadership have to look like to create a people-centered culture when you get into kind of adoption of technologies? And I'm specifically saying technologies rather than AI, because I think it doesn't matter.
So I suppose there's a clarifying piece about culture that's important, because I know that this is not to dissuade us from using it broadly, but to understand that it isn't a thing. It isn't really a thing, culture. If I asked this room what culture meant, I would get, as many people as are in here, a different definition. And fundamentally, the best we can do with it is probably something along the lines of the preponderance and patterns of behavior in an organization. And that's clarifying for us, for the job that we're trying to do here, if we're talking about adoption. Because what we are talking about then is what behaviors do we need to encourage, what behaviors do we need to dissuade, and how do we create champions and managers of the behaviors we're trying to encourage. That's the thing that will change what we then called culture. Because your experience, all of you, in any workplace you can imagine, is because of behaviors. Because none of us are mind readers as much as we think we are. And so our experience is determined by what people do and what people say. And these are things that we can use in our understanding of this question. So the narratives around AI adoption in workplaces are part of either the benefit, the thing that will make it work, or they're part of the challenge. A lot of people we talk to, managers, are using the inevitability statements around AI. You might as well get on board. You know, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. And I don't know about you, but that kind of narrative from a just purely human perspective is likely to create antagonism, right? Oh, you think you're going to tell me 20 years as a business analyst and now you're going to tell me about this? No, it will create antagonism instantly. And I think we don't realize that the narratives that are being chosen because we diminish comms within organizations is really vital to getting this to work. Whereas there is another approach of empowerment that talks about how there is technology. This is simply part of a sequence of technology, elements of which you have embraced over your 50-year career. You know, some of them will remember when Excel came in and this newfangled thing, and they'll remember when Excel had suddenly graphs so that you could make in it. And so if you can help people to realize this is something that not only is not foreign to them and they aren't past it, but they have done this before, there's an empowerment narrative that helps people to embrace something, or at least, which this is the term that we use, the term that we think you need to get to people before you can move them to a better place is just AI agnosticism is where you need to get people to, right? You don't need to get people to a place where they love it, because that has dangers too. There are lots of workplaces right now where you have people, very senior people, simply deferring to AI. Its results come through, and either because they're so busy or they are indolent, these results come through, they do not look at them, they are packaged now nicely, and they send them off, and there is risk and danger there. So it's not a question of just trying to encourage engagement or adoption, it's finding a place where adoption is not laden with risk and is the most utility. So that narrative, I don't know if the presumption that all managers don't have the skill to adopt AI is the reality, but I do think many managers lack the coaching skills that enable their teams to adopt what they already have decided to orient themselves towards.
I think that is brilliant. I often think I talk about this as giving agency back to people, right? You're putting them at the heart of this. You remain the expert, right? You're the one who knows what the challenges are in your area. This is a tool that helps you with that, right? I think is but I love that idea. Well, it's coming. You better just just gear up, get ready. I am going to come to Kate next, actually. That's all right. And I wanted to talk to you about, you've had this career shaping kind of standards for safe and healthy workplaces. And we often talk about the technical capabilities of these systems and the skills of people, right? But I wanted to just kind of switch the conversation a little bit and ask you about the key health and safety dimensions that you think are needed to be understood if we're going to, make these technologies work better and create a flourishing society. So from a kind of specifically from a health and safety perspective, what do you think are what's missing?
How long?
You have 2 minutes. Yes, 2 minutes.
Gosh.
I think would be good.
So I think, who have we got in the room? Have we got kind of tech professionals, HR professionals, academics, kind of, oh gosh, nobody's saying anything. All of the above, a bit of a mixture. Okay. Thank you. Okay, all right. So I'm not quite sure who my audience is, so we'll work around that. So I think there's a couple of key points, and actually they've already been covered really very effectively by Jonathan. So one of the most important aspects is this kind of nebulous thing around culture. And, it is about those behaviours. And I think the thing that really, for me, lies at the heart of culture is what you're doing to create trust. So there are some key elements. So consistency, transparency, consultation, collaboration. They are so critical when you're looking at culture. And creating that culture of trust. And from a health and safety point of view, it kind of affects both the physical safety and also the psychological and other forms of health. And particularly when we're talking about AI, which for those people, and I went on a really fascinating journey because everybody's talking about AI. It's this mystical thing. What on earth is it? And I'll probably insult the techies in the room. And I was like, oh, I'll do some work. And I know some techie people, and I was having a chat to them about what on earth it was. And my penny dropped, and I went, oh, it's an algorithm and some data. Oh, okay. Well, we've had algorithms for a long time, and we've had data for a long time. So we're just scaling it up. And yes, it's faster, and yes, there's more, and yes, that has all sorts of exciting implications. But okay, that made life a lot easier for me. But one of the things that we need to look at is how we are creating agency. So from a psychological point of view, we know that one of the things that will help people's mental health in the workplace is autonomy. So where can these tools, whatever they are, work design in a wider way, create autonomy? Where is autonomy taken away? They are kind of your hotspots. Overlay that, the biggest thing that will cause psychological harm, apart from a lack of trust, is change. So how are you managing change in your organisation? And I have to say that, I've been working in this field for 25 years now, and organisations are shocking at managing change. If you get that right, actually you'll overcome a lot of these problems, whatever you are changing, whether it's some new technology, whether it's work design, whatever it happens to be. So they're kind of the call-outs. The wider one that I want to flag really from a kind of a technical safety point of view is when we come back to this question of data. So one of the things that I'm seeing is organisations are starting to think about how they can use the data that they hold around health and safety. So for example, incident data. How can they use that data to predict into the future? The challenge that we have is that data is shockingly bad. But nobody's really talking about that. And I think this is one of my biggest concerns is what are we storing up for the future? What are the latent and the hidden risks? Because AI is based on data. And most of the data that it is fed is really poor. And we are not talking about, I think, some of the critical things about data management and tidying up that data. So I have real concerns, particularly in sort of high hazard industries, that we are storing up latent risk because we are using data to make decisions about risk that is missing kind of key points. The last one, and again, it's kind of been touched on, but I'll frame it from my world, which is about being an intelligent customer. One of the things that we see, whether it's for health and safety, whether it's for technology, whether it's for, a new website or whatever it is, when organizations are purchasing something, they're not doing the research to understand the questions that they need to ask to be robust about understanding what they're getting back. We see it with contractor management. Oh, you're the expert, so you tell us what we need, and fine, we won't ask too many questions. That is where you are going to just create a hornet's nest of problems. You have to understand what are the questions that you need to know. So if for AI, I'm not an expert, I'm not going to go detail, but there are questions you go, well, what's the algorithm? What's the code? What's the question that's being fed in? Where's data coming from? What's that data? There are really actually, when you break it down, quite simple questions that you can ask to at least start to give yourself a little bit of insight and integrity around that process. So I think, they're kind of my takeaways, but one of the things I always think about whenever I'm listening to these discussions is the Jurassic World film. Yeah, the first one. I'm looking around the room. Probably most people have seen that one. There's a conversation. Dr. Malcolm, and I think he says something like, we're so busy thinking on, wondering whether or not we can. We don't stop to think whether or not we should.
Exactly. Thank you. Another one that absolutely, I think every time any of you speak needs a little clap. And I'm going to come to you to talk about kind of the research that IFOW has been doing on action-oriented and people-centered AI adoption. I want to ask you about two things. One is, what are the principles that determine whether or not AI improves or undermines work? And then, why is work design important? in getting getting to responsible AI adoption. So both the design and what are the kind of principles?
Well, inspired by everyone else, I'm going to try and practice triple leap learning and organise the answer by thinking about the dimensions of work design. So it can be a way in which we can think about what should we do as well as what we can do. A way of which thinking about how we can actually shape transition and also concurrently make sure that we're thinking big when we think about the term work design, not just thinking about a single role. So one of the first dimensions is, of course, skills and capabilities. And we'd say, and I'd argue, that it's a fantastic way of refocusing on the human aspect. So again, building on Magda Sofia's amazing work for the PIS Readers Review on capabilities and work capabilities, from thinking not just about skills at a moment in time, but what can humans actually do, and what and how are their skills actually being developed, and therefore helping us move away from what we do in the UK, which is sometimes fix on skills demand at a moment in time, because we know that's not happening, and we know that the changes that it's changing dynamically. So that's the first point, the principle. So think capabilities, think human capabilities, not just skills. Secondly, again, how do we do this thing? How do we actually maximise autonomy, which we've all agreed is very important for different reasons. We have to think bigger than thinking about autonomy, about the choice of a particular tool or even use of a particular tool, but think about what we're doing with it. What tasks we're applying it to, how it sits in relation to our roles, how it sits in relation to other people's roles, how it then invites us to think about the type of management. Again, looping back to the PIS Readers Review, high involvement management practice, hugely important to mediate better outcomes, basically undersold, understood, needs to be upped in thinking about how we shape better transitions from an organisational point of view. Next principle, it requires us to think about changing decision rights and roles and responsibilities if it's done properly, or if it's done well. So it requires us, in a sense, then, to go into what you've said, Kate, about transparency, to go deeper about transparency, about what it is and how we can understand. Not just about the technology or the impacts, but how it's configured. What the architectures are for that, and how that's being determined. So overall, it kind of will help us answer these questions that we're talking about and the challenge of adoption by requiring us to think about what are we designing for. So you can't avoid it. We can't avoid it. We can't help if we have this in mind, thinking what are we aiming for? What challenge are we seeking? What's the goal that we want there?
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. You've done the hard job of summarizing on my behalf, so thank you. So I'm going to come to Slido, and in preparation for that coming up, I'll start the audience. I'll start my panel off with my final question, which is, are we kidding ourselves, basically, here in the UK? As in, here we've been talking about a set of technologies that are really hard, that in terms of, the way that they're received by employees, we have to do a lot of work in order to make it happen, that we've got saturation rather than real problem fixing. We've got lots of cultural challenges, missing accountability and governance and standards and so on. And there is this rhetoric or narrative that says that AI is taking all our jobs. So do we think that we got this wrong, or do we think that we actually do have a set of technologies that can help with the massive productivity gap that we have here in the UK? Who wants to take that one before we go to the audience?
Well, the mic's in my hand. So I think it's like any new technology. It really presents some really exciting opportunities, but we just need to be alert to what the potential downsides or consequences are. I think one of the areas that we are missing an opportunity is to really use AI to fundamentally reconsider work design. I think if we actually kind of took a huge step back about, okay, these are the outputs that we need, these are the outcomes, what does work look like if we were to completely rethink it? And I think that could be really exciting, and that could free up a lot of potential for human creativity in a way that we're not exploring at the moment. So I think that's one of the areas which I think is really great. I think from a kind of a productivity point of view, there's some really, again, exciting opportunities. You know, a lot of this technology, and certainly kind of the ability to work in different locations, gives us access to a much greater percentage of our workforce. So those who can't commute into a city centre, for instance, those who have disabilities which mean that going into the office on a regular basis is a challenge. And we know that if we tap into some of those different groups, we create greater innovation because we have greater diversity of thought. So for me, I see some real opportunities in terms of addressing that productivity gap, because we can tap into a greater percentage of the workforce that we're potentially missing at the moment, which will then actually drive innovation because we've got more diversity of thought.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on, actually, unless someone's got a burning thing to add to that. No. All right. So how I really like this question, which is, how do we prevent skill atrophy through using these tools, right? So the model that we live by, right, is people come in at the bottom rung, they learn by doing, and they become our future experts. What we've got now is the things that these tools are really good at automating is the first few bottom rungs. And so we're trying to create tomorrow's experts without putting them through the normal training, right, that we have in every career, every sector that we have. So how do we prevent skill atrophy?
So I think, I know that this is a concern for people, skill atrophy, but there are the logistical solves for this, but they require organizational buy-in, right? If you simply replace chunks of your younger graduates with technology and automation, then skills that perhaps senior partners or more senior people will have earned in those earlier stages will be gone. They just won't be there. There'll be a tiny number of people who you still don't use in that way, use in a different way. So there's going to be some challenges there, but it means that you have to change your onboarding, you have to change your training, and you have to rethink your organization from a utilization perspective. How many hours of functional money can we make out of this 19-year-old? To how can we spend time to ensure that this person has the skills? And also we consider that the skills are shifting, right? If you're working with technology, one of the things you need is discrimination skills. You need the ability to be critical thinkers about output that can be entirely wrong, but is said with remarkable certainty. And so you need those kind of skills in order to make this work. And the other thing to say is that there is no necessary theory that says that skills atrophy must happen with the utilization of AI. If you are an adopter of AI as opposed to a deferrer of AI, because if you're one of those people who simply inputs a question that might have even been posed to you by another person, and then when the answer comes, copies and pastes it into a document and delivers it, then yes, there will be some things that you don't know how to do, but I'm not sure yet what the theory of change is on how stuff you already know disappears. We do forget things over time. I don't remember what I learned in French for GCSE, well, O-levels. But I do know that most of the useful stuff I've kept. I can't spell very well, but Grammarly takes care of that. So is that a skill atrophy, or is that simply me properly adopting the use of technology?
I think that's a good way of reframing the question. I think thinking deeply about what do we mean and how worried about this are we, and are we worried about the right parts of it is the key. I guess that brings me to another question. Erin, you talked about this perception among leadership teams that we're going to save money by replacing the bottom rung and automating a lot of these tasks. How do we make sure that young people don't feel that leadership teams are using AI as an opportunity not to hire? And what are some of the things that need to be done there?
Yeah, I mean, I think important to clarify, leadership teams aren't looking to replace the bottom rung. The majority of directors and leadership teams are concerned about the potential impacts on their workforce. The point I was making is that they're looking for ways to save money given the kind of cost pressures they're under. And because automation and this seemingly new technology, which isn't new at all, is being presented to them as a way in which they could save money. That's where those two are being conflated. But I think, it's important to remember it's not that managers and leaders are looking to eliminate this kind of entry-level rung. But I think it really feeds into the previous question as well. It's how we're kind of reframing skills and what that looks like through the pipeline. What are we training for? And at the moment, we're in this really pretty early on in this very, very difficult transitional period, I guess you could call it, whether it's another technological revolution. And so we're training still for types of work that may be changing pretty rapidly. So it's how do we kind of shift the skills taxonomies that we've become very, very comfortable with for the industries that we've been comfortable with in a way that they're keeping up with, for example, what new business models look like, what are the skills we need to be training for those. And we're just in this really kind of tense period, which I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So again, we need civil society, policymakers, businesses to work together to kind of tease out how do we get from kind of point A to point B, not really knowing what point B looks like yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Erin. Anna, can I come to you, or did you want to add something?
Just very quickly.
Sure.
A shout out to the GLA and the Mayor of London's team that hopefully are here. We have designed a fantastic survey which covers this area, because we also need to understand it better.
Yes.
So keep an eye out and complete it when it comes.
Brilliant. So we'll look out for that. But I will come to you as well, I think we've got time for literally the last question, which is, how do we ensure that organizations ensure that human factors integration is built from the start rather than as an ethical afterthought? So how do we design from the beginning, especially when these systems are reshaping authority, they're reshaping cognitive load and autonomy in the workplace?
If we kind of embed what we've been talking about work design and the potential to redesign and how we can use it to understand and to shape it, it can, I think, be applied downstream as well as upstream. Okay. It's getting that kind of cycle, I think, that we need. So I would say that by using this lens to interrogate what we know and what the options are, we can do just that.
Oh, that's a brilliant answer, which is you don't have to get it right at the beginning. You can come back to it. And I think that's one of the things that everyone should take away, which is we don't know all the answers. We don't know where B is, where we're going. But what we do know is that we have to care about our people, about the culture that we're building and the behaviors we want to see. And we have to keep iterating. We won't get it right the first time. And even if we got it right today, we have to keep looking at it because everything continues to change. So with that, I'm going to bring our panel to a close. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for contributing.